Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this professional learning opportunity. I am Jessica Roberts from NCEA, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. Just a few housekeeping notes as people are joining. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A or chat windows. We will be monitoring the questions and we'll try answering them in the allotted time. Within 24 hours of today's webinar, you will receive an email link to the recording as well as an online survey. We encourage you to share this with all of your colleagues. Once you fill out the survey, once you filled out the survey, a certificate of completion for the webinar will be emailed to you. Today's webinar, Virtue Education Taught from a Catholic Perspective, is being presented by Sister John Dominic from Disciple of Christ Education and Virtue. During the presentation, Sister John Dominic will discuss how virtue education taught from a Catholic perspective is foundational for character formation as well as social emotional learning. The basis is to extend into daily education and development life the sanctifying grace that was given to each child upon the reception of the sacrament of baptism. Before I turn it over to our presenter, let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O Christ, our teacher, we thank you for the gift of Catholic schools, where the message of your life, death, and resurrection is proclaimed, discipleship is modeled, worship of you is cultivated, and community is experienced. Increase our zeal for ensuring that all children and families can benefit from an authentic Catholic education, and that Catholic schools grow in their ability to nurture the souls and form the minds of its students for generations to come. We ask this in your name. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Sister John Dominic, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate the introduction. And in case anyone's confused, the title that's there, Raised in Grace, Made for Wholeness, really ties in to we talk about the importance of virtue education. So that's really what, I don't want you to think you kind of signed up for the wrong thing, but that's actually what the topic is going to be. And as we work our way through this presentation, I think you'll see that I will certainly address the importance of virtue education, especially in our Catholic schools. So to begin, I like to begin my presentations by showing this image of Our Lady of Good Help. And this is the one approved Marian apparition of Our Lady in the United States. It's north of Green Bay. And here the Blessed Mother appeared, and she gave a very special message. Actually, I think that we can take to heart, those of us involved in Catholic education and even in catechesis, where she had said, gather the children in this wild country and teach them what they need to know for salvation. Now, that's very broad. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about Our Lady. When she comes, she kind of gives these little the messages, but there's so much for us to be able to unpack with that. But I think where we want to entrust what we do in education, and even this conversation we're going to have today, even at that time, which was in the 1800s and in the wilderness of Wisconsin at the time, it was a wild country. But even today, in our own time, here in the United States, all that we face in Catholic education, there's so much that's coming to the children that I think in a very special way, we need the tenderness of a mother. We need the Blessed Mother to be here to help us, to guide us in this wonderful work that we're going to do. And the other part of her apparition that she has said was to not be afraid. So we trust in her presence and her maternal care with us as we undertake this wonderful work. So I want you take a look here at this kind of a logo that we've designed for Raised in Grace, where in the center we have a feather, and the feather can represent many things. And it can represent the children that's in your classroom with the hands on the outside. It could be your work and your partnership that you have between yourself and the parents. It could be yourself and your other coworkers. This also could be an idea of parents, raising the child. But the idea is that what our responsibility in doing is that we kind of create this this holding environment where we lead them. We're not kind of touching them and directing them, but we lead them as they respond to God's grace, which is God's participation in life. But we lead them with wisdom, to the understanding of freedom, and also in trust. But ultimately, like we have the 1 star there, is we want to lead them in truth, beauty, and goodness. And I will unpack that more as we go along. So keep kind of this image in your mind as we move through the presentation together today. Now, when I think of Catholic schools, I have this next to it, but I'd like to think of, oftentimes in Catholic education, we have this emphasis where we do a lot on Catholic identity. We go through and we check the boxes. I have the crucifix up. I have the Mary statue. I have all the kind of externals of Catholic identity. But I think of this as a synergy, really, where it is identity, culture, and worldview. And each of these flow one into the other. And each part of this section is equally important in the formation and the education of the children, but also in the culture that we set within our school, the worldview that we bring. But really, the identity, sometimes we can think of it as the institution, but really the identity, worldview, and culture lies in the person, in you, in the educator. It's your identity that you see yourself as a believing Catholic Christian, as someone that holds dear to your heart all the parts of our Catholic faith. That forms your worldview, how you approach curriculum, the children, all that happens within the Catholic school, and then also the culture that you would create within the environment of the school, which ultimately helps us when we're raising and educating the children, that surround, that kind of holding environment that I referred to. So when we think of virtue education, and I've got 2 different ways that you can look at this here. One is that we have with the virtue tree, where we see that the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity are down here, and it's kind of the root system. It's what keeps us grounded into it and provides if you think what is it that keeps a tree healthy, okay? Through the sap is really the love, is really the Holy Spirit that keeps us alive. But we have a good sense of seeing the interconnectedness of the theological virtues, the cardinal virtues, or what's often called the moral virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, as the related virtues, but also the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So it's all the interconnectedness that as we grow in one, everything else grows together. And we see the beautiful fruits here on the outside, where the fruits of the Holy Spirit become alive as we're living this integrated life. Another way to look at this as well is that we see here in the center where I have the person, and that with the triangle, which is a symbol of the Trinity, so that when we're baptized into the life, we're immersed into the life of the Trinity, and we receive the gifts of faith, hope, and love. We receive the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and from that, we receive this grace, this sanctifying grace, to live fully the cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, and all the virtues that are related to that. So why is this important? Okay, this is so important and to our formation, and also into the life of the children that you educate every day, because it's living fully these graces of baptism, that we are participating in God's life. We're kind of lifted up to the supernatural life, which enables us to really become the person God's created us to be. We're created in God's image and likeness, and we want to reflect this life of the Trinity, and we're moving towards, this holiness, this happiness, this state of human flourishing. So taking that understanding of where this begins, our life of grace begins at baptism, this is a pretty intense timeline for you to be able to see. And we will have this in a booklet that'll be available for purchase for you. If you had attended the NCA conference, we gave this out as a complimentary copy to everyone who attended. But this was a work done by myself and Dr. Karen Villa, who's a clinical neuropsychologist, where we looked really at the whole span of before birth all the way up to about the age of 24, and looked at the different stages of development, noticing at the different times when the sacramental life is important, the growth of virtue, different times of intense neurological organization. But what's important that we want to see in this is this understanding. If you think of that holding environment of the feathers, so you think of the children that you have the amazing opportunity of educating them, that we want to be cognizant of each of these stages and what we can do to really to form them, to form their interior life and form their spiritual life, that leads them to this point of secure attachment, and also to this point where they really hold on, to this beautiful life of grace. So I can't go into all this, but I want to show this to you because eventually we will be unpacking this more later. But an important point to understand is something that's come out of the neuroscience, which is called neuroplasticity. And this is, and I'll see if I can move down here a little bit, is the ability of the brain to wire and rewire itself across the lifespan. So if you think back to that very detailed timeline that you saw, that all during that time, the minds, there's a sensitivity of the child's mind that it is constantly wiring, rewiring itself. So this knitting together needs to take place in a loving and responsive relationship. It takes place in relationship versus a neglectful or stressful time. So even if we were to take the example of the first 1,000 years, what they're starting to discover is that if there's something during that time of development that may have happened, that does have an impact later in life. So St. Thomas Aquinas, in his book, Being in Essence, says that an error in the beginning leads to a great one in the end. So what this stresses for us, that one takeaway that we have in Catholic education, is the importance of teaching children about truth, beauty, and goodness. The idea of that what we know to be true, the fullness of the faith, so that by that theological virtue of faith, they can hold on and believe all that God has revealed, to hold on and to take that, all that he has said about salvation, to trust in him, and ultimately that we can love him, is that is what holds us together, is that we have this responsibility of handing that on, but also to form them and help them to understand really what the virtues are, which I will, so again, we look to the dignity of the human person. If you look at these beautiful images of the children here, that they're central. They're the whole reason why you do what you do. The whole reason why I've done what I do in my life is that we want to, we look at them as a child of God. We recognize that they're made for wholeness, that we have the responsibility of forming their bodies and their souls, their minds and their hearts, and helping them to lead, to understand what God's will is for them in their life. So again, with this, just to reinforce what I talked about, that the Christian soul, we participate in God in this habitual grace, that God is at the deepest center in this, and the theological virtues, as I just mentioned, of faith, hope, and love, enables us to participate in God's life, and the life of grace is replicated in us so that we have this inner life of the Trinity. So that's a lot to unpack, but is very important for us to understand the truth of that, because that's what we are about as we're educating, as we're raising children in grace. So I know that there's a lot going on, a lot of talk and understanding about, what is, social emotional learning, that we need to, that this needs to be a part of what we provide in the formation of children. And I believe that, and it's important. And we can also have a whole historical conversation about how there was a gap, there was a vacuum that kind of took place in Catholic schools, where the virtue education and this really the social skills used to be so much a part of the character formation. And not that no one didn't mean to do it, we just weren't as intentional about it. Okay. So when we look at this line from the Catechism where it says that the emotions and feelings can be taken up into the virtues or perverted by vices. Think back to what I just said about neuroplasticity, is that the brain is always wiring and rewiring itself. Okay. So if we understand emotions, which are a part of who we are as a person, we all have feelings that we experience, but these feelings and these emotions need to be held, need to be surrounded by the virtues, understanding what the virtues are, and need to be taken up into that, because then we're experiencing this unity of body and soul. So let's look at this differently. Let's look at this in another way. So if we think of the human person as body and soul, okay, so the soul is a part of who we are as a person, okay, and the body is our flesh. So with our body, we have the brain and the nervous system, which the cortex, the upper part of it, is our ability to reason. The limbic system is where our feelings and our emotions are. And then the brainstem, this is the part where we have this kind of, how do you say, the regulatory, like the fear or the flight type experiences that we have in the brainstem. So this is the way in which it goes up. I'll show you another example of this, but with the soul, the faculties of the soul are the intellect and the will. The virtues reside in the soul, and grace is our participation in God's life. So with the brainstem is the survival, the safety or threat. I didn't see that there. But so what you see here is that when we talk about social emotional learning and we talk about virtue education, it needs to take both body and soul. So the virtues, as I said, reside in the soul. They enable us to perfect our intellect and our will, okay, which are the faculties of our soul, but also they enable us with our working and understanding how the brain and understanding the feelings and the emotions are a part of our body, that they have to be working together. And so this is where the difference comes in, where yes, there can be skills that we can learn, or there's strategies that we do, which obviously I have some that are here, but it can't just be the body alone. It has to be the body and the soul, because this is what we believe and we hold on to so strongly in our Catholic tradition, and understanding the formation of the whole person. So again, this is a very detailed infographic for you to see, but this is another way of looking at what I had showed you, where we know that the brain develops and the information goes from the brainstem to the limbic system to the cortex. So is this regulation, this relate, and then we come to reason, where we're able to take in and understand something. You can notice it as you kind of move across, where I've listed where we see the intellect and the will, the emotions of struggle and belonging, the emotions of desire and safety at the different levels, and then also the findings that we have from interpersonal neurobiology. This is the work of Dr. Dan Siegel, where he talks about how we need to cultivate each of these qualities of the brain: balance, resilience, empathy, and insight, which also have this correspondence with temperance, fortitude, justice, and temperance. And then we have the lining here of the theological virtues. So what this shows you here, again, is this body-soul connection that we need to understand what virtue is. Virtue is this habit of doing good that becomes a part of who we are, and that enables us to regulate our passions and our desires, which enables us to make decisions where we choose good, and ultimately moves us up to this upper part of reasoning where we use our intellect. So when we're looking at with children, this life of grace is that children that they need to not have simply to build their skills on their own to succeed, but rely on the life-giving relationship with Christ and his grace during the rigors and challenges of growing up. Now, this is very important, and that's why I have two different examples here. Like you see the child standing here on this rock foundation, okay, surrounded by the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love, understanding that we want to give this intentional instruction about virtue, all that they need to know about their relationship with Jesus Christ, that they learn in their catechesis, that they have this friendship, this relationship with Christ, and that, as I mentioned earlier, about when they have experiences of their emotions or their feelings, that they bring those up into the virtues, which enables them to this point of human flourishing, and really to the practice of virtue. If we don't do that, then we're kind of building this foundation on quicksand, where they're dependent upon just skills and strategies that they learn without being dependent upon God's grace. This participation, understanding that God is with them to hold them, to strengthen them, to be their foundation. And we're not giving them, handing on to them the fullness of the faith. Let me give you an example. St. Teresa, the little flower, okay? We all love the stories of the saints, but this is a great one to be able to understand, okay? So the one great thing that we understand about the saints is that oftentimes we love the human aspects of them. So with the little flower, when she was remember she was in a cloister, so when you live in a convent and things are quiet, you kind of notice everything about everybody that's around you. So there'd be a sister that would be rattling her rosary beads, or when she would go to the laundry to kind of clean out the clothes, she was constantly getting water flashed in her face. So instead of like reacting and getting upset with them, she recognized that she had to take these situations of when she was annoyed, okay, and practice the virtue of patience. And so she would just think of a way that she could offer that up, think of how she could grow in patience by not responding, not reacting, and came up with this idea where she would just do like little penance beads. And kind of every time she had these little opportunities when she practiced patience, she would either tie a knot on the string or she would move the bead. And then that was a reminder of her that she was able to, through God's grace, to overcome that situation of being annoyed. And eventually she became more and more patient. That's an example of what I mean by when we take these occasions of when our feelings or emotions are there, we find an understanding of virtue, and we could practice something that helps us to overcome that, and not realizing that God is giving the growth and helping us to become more patient through his grace. So in the school culture, again, this is something that we want to provide for them, where we teach them what virtue is, where you can do it with the whole school, where you can focus on a virtue, so that this language becomes a part of all that has that surround in your school building, of understanding what it is, this culture of virtue in the school. And it really begins, as I said at the very beginning, this really begins when this is just kind of another visual to show you. You can tell I like visuals to kind of tell stories, where here you had where the leader of the school, if they're embracing this, understanding the importance of virtue education, understanding their own identity, their worldview, the culture, that impacts the faculty and the staff, which impacts the classroom. And then we have this whole surround of love, which binds everyone together in community. So is this interconnectedness of how when we're all striving to live this way and live in that same direction. So this, and what I want to kind of move to here is tell you, kind of give you how this understanding of why virtue, so I've kind of given you a little bit of a theological understanding, underpinning of the importance of virtue education, but also to emphasize and also to recognize that there is a need, okay? That in the culture, and this is something that I noticed, I was a principal for 20 years, and during my time as being a principal, I noticed that and not just in the school where I was, but also in other places, you know, we were seeing this fragmentation. There was a disconnectedness, isolation, anxiety that began to arise, and this continues. So it did reinforce this is just a bar graph that shows that if we look at this time in 2010, 2011, that where there's this growth of depression and anxiety that's happened is really when was really at the advent or the beginning. Let me move this up so you can see this. The advent of the social media and internet use among the young, and that their brains, and this is in a part where their brains were experiencing this intense neurological thing, and this is where the stress sensitivity became more and more, and this is having an impact on that. So that's important to realize that the social media, the impact of the technology, the internet use has had a physical impact on the youth. So this need, as I mentioned, recognizing that, and I mentioned that earlier, that, you know, oftentimes in our mission statements, we look at the spiritual, physical, and intellectual formation, but also this need that we do need to talk about the social. So I don't want to give any indication that we shouldn't be addressing this. We have to do this intentionally. We can't just assume that it's happening. And this comes in, you know, positive relationships, the social skills, the emotional skills, but all of that really, when we understand the virtues more thoroughly and more in depth, we see how that really gives shape and kind of is that holding environment for the social and the emotional skills of children. So what is virtue? You know, as I mentioned, virtue is this habit of doing good. We've developed all sorts of resources to help you in this process, because sometimes it's difficult to say, you know, how do I teach, you know, fortitude or temperance to a kindergartner, right? We've kind of done all that hard work for you. And so it's learning this language, it's bringing this lexicon into your school so that you can see that, and you can begin to use this as a part of your vocabulary in your school. So to kind of take it back again to this idea of neuroplasticity, where we want to wire this wiring of the brain towards goodness. That when the virtues are intentionally taught, that we see this relationship that takes place where virtue is at the heart of it, that there is this gift of self that happens. This, you know, a lot of what we understand when we talk about the theology of the body, contrary to what we see oftentimes in isolation, where there's kind of this drawn to this virtual world, the gaming, the pornography, where all of this impacts the mind. And that's when the brain is literally rewired. Okay, it's rewired where the culture and all the influences that come in through these different means are impacting the brain, because our brain is a social organ. The brain develops in relationship. So it's going to be impacting that, and it's going to impact their interior life. It's going to impact their relationship with God. And then what's happening is we're seeing this separation that's taking place between the body and the soul. So St. John Paul II, said this. He says the worst prison would be a closed heart, and that's what can happen if we're not living this openness and we're not allowing our mind to be formed towards goodness, towards truth, towards what is beautiful. So this is just an example. As I know this is another thing that would be difficult for you to see, but when we think about we have the disciple of Christ virtues, well, it isn't just the 4 cardinal virtues that I mentioned. There's all these related virtues that come with justice, the fortitude, with prudence, with temperance. And what we want to do when we're educating them is we want to give them the meaning, understand and give them ways that this can be cultivated. So again, just like I gave that example of St. Teresa of the little flower, understanding how that she could kind of take virtue and apply that to that area of her life when she was struggling. That's why when we have, we may be struggling with anger, meekness is a virtue that we could practice, and ways that we can do that. You can read lots of books out there about anger, where they tell you want to kind of have cooling thoughts. Well, it can be counting to 10, it can be your breathing, it can be walking away. All of those are ways that we're showing what the virtue looks like and sounds like, just like we did here in this one particular example that we have here with prudence. So with the virtue cards that we developed, for every single virtue that you just saw on that slide before, there's 8 or 9 different examples, which are really what this virtue looks like, sounds like, which is giving you the tools, the understanding on how, if you have, for example, with perseverance, you may have, this is related to fortitude, you may want to give up on something. You're like, I can't get it. Okay, so what is it you need to do? Well, you study for the test. You kind of calmly do something again. You repeat that. You take your time to do your schoolwork carefully. So you find ways or actions that you're doing to help you to cultivate and practice this virtue, so it helps you to overcome that struggle that you may be having. So there, as I mentioned, there's examples. I don't have time to go in all of them, but there's examples for all of them. Well, there's like over 200 cards that can give you and show you how you can actually apply what this virtue looks like and sounds like in your life, and that's your toolkit to bringing together that body and the soul. So as you live the virtue, so you learn it, the language, you begin to live it out. All right. And again, this is this bringing together of the intellect, using your intellect and your will, this life of grace, and you begin to live in a sense of freedom. So intentional neuroplasticity, like I said earlier, and again, this understanding, this Catholic understanding of virtue, it begins, it's the core, it's what's foundational to how we experience this, how we live, and we have all the different examples that illustrate that as we understand what the virtues mean. So if you were to take something here, a chart, one of our sisters illustrated all of these, and we were to take one of these examples of something, how you may be feeling, okay? Again, remember, we're talking about how the virtues are taken up into the emotions and the feelings. So, or as the other example said, it could be perverted for something that is vice, where it's not virtuous. So if you took something like jealousy, where you may be feeling envious or resentful towards somebody, how can the virtues help you with that? Okay, so with jealousy, oftentimes, we're experiencing a sadness of what we see in the good in another, good that another person may be doing. So instead of continuously taking and allowing ourselves to kind of get in the mode of thinking those negative thoughts, you could look at a virtue that's the opposite of that, which would be kindness. And instead of dwelling on what's making you feel jealous of that, try to find a good thing, something related to kindness, and use that as a positive thought towards that individual or that situation that may be pulling you down. Okay, again, you're bringing that virtue into that, and you're elevating that up to a higher level, where you wouldn't want this, you wouldn't want jealousy, where we could go into one of the capital sins of envy, to kind of feed on that and fester on that is going to lead you to a sin, get you more and more drawn into that. So I could sit here and give you examples of each one of these, looking at the virtues, showing how the virtues come in, they take up these feelings and emotions, and they allow God's grace to come in, and he's alive and operative within you. You're still doing the things you would do, but you're allowing God's grace to come in and to be transformative in your life. So one thing that that when we see here, talking to us as educators, the fastest way to calm the nervous system is empathy and connection. Okay, and empathy and connection, what we mean by this is that what you can do as an educator, what you can do as a parent or as a principal, that if you go back to what I referred to here, when you're seeing, you may see the students in your classroom maybe experiencing any one of these feelings or emotions or something, you can come to them and you can react with them. And what is it that Mary did, that Jesus did when he encountered Mary here? Okay, she was weeping, she was like, where did you put my Lord? Where was he? And what calmed her is when he said her name. It was that relationship. It was that connection. So as a teacher, as a parent, or what's there, this what takes place is when you have that relational aspect. And so when you look at those emotions, you look at them and you call them, and they see you and they're relating with you, and you're showing them and modeling to them how you can bring them out of that situation. That's what virtues are in action. That's what it is to live the virtuous life. And another thing that I find fascinating too is that we understand co-regulation, which is a biological priority as human beings. So this is like a biological fact that happens. So we're creating God's image and likeness. As I mentioned, we're social creatures. Our brain is a social organ. Okay, we need one another to find feelings of safety, security, and connection. So again, this regulate, this relate, this reason, okay, this co-regulation is what you, as a teacher in the classroom, provide for the children that are present. And in this example here, we can see, different examples of the children. You've got the one on the far left, the little boy, who's probably pretty calm, and his nervous system is pretty calm. The one in the middle may be a little hyperactive, all right? And then the one to the side is disengaged. Now, this is an example of the polyvagal theory, which I don't have time to go into today. But what's important here is that as the educator in this situation, that you are able to co-regulate. So you have this means by which you get yourself calm, or what we refer to as a still point of grace, where you recognize that you're held in God's grace. But the children in your classroom will co-regulate with you, okay? They're going to pick up from your cues, which is called neuroception or resonance or mirror neurons. So like mirror neurons is when I smile at somebody, they smile back. That's going to be the tone. So when you have this surround, this culture of virtue in your classroom, everybody understands the same vocabulary. Everybody understands what the virtues look like and sound like. And it's just understood that how you interact with them is a part of what you're creating in this culture, and then also actually even the worldview that you bring as you begin to see and recognize the virtues that are present in those students. So you as the teacher, a way you could co-regulate with the one child that's disengaged, when that child understands the virtues, understands what they look like and sound like, you can find in that child a virtue. You can find something that maybe that child has the ability to do something that the other students can't, and you recognize that virtue and you call it by name, and you look at her and you use her name, you describe to her what you spot in her, what you see in her. And what does that do? That creates that relationship between you and her, and it elevates her. It elevates her dignity. It enables her that I've been seen by my teacher, and that's what you bring as you stand here in this relationship between, looking, and you're helping them to regulate the one that may be hyperactive. You're relating to them, and you're bringing them to this point of reason so that their mind is open and that they're ready to learn. So that's that process of co-regulation. Now, there's 4 words that Dr. Dan Siegel talks about, which are really important in understanding this whole process of what you can do as a teacher, and also how you take that after you've learned this vocabulary of virtue, and you want to show how you live it out, how it becomes a part of how you take up the feelings and the emotions, and how you're forming the intellect and the will, those faculties of the soul of the children. How you're bringing all of this together is that we talk about safe, seen, soothed, and secure. So the first one is the sense of, the sense of safety, where the children need to feel protected, trusting deeply that the adults in their lives do not become a source or a threat. So this comes back to what I talked about, the still point of grace. So we have the theological virtue of hope here, where they're anchored. They have this sense of safety. So when they enter your classroom, they enter the school, that they know that they're coming into your presence, that you see that you bring this sense of safety to them, and that they trust you, that they know that you want what is best for them. Now, granted, some days are harder than others. I understand that. But the sense of safety that you provide for them. The next one is seen, which I've kind of tied here with the theological virtue of faith, but being able to tune into the inner world of a child, understand the emotions and the stressors behind a particular behavior. So this is awareness and attunement. So sometimes when you're interacting with them, you may see a particular behavior in a child that is ongoing, and so it's beyond, it's kind of below the surface of what you're seeing on the top. But when you, as the teacher, kind of show up and you understand where the child is at, that you've seen them, okay, again, this is where this language of virtue may come in, is very important, because they already understand the vocabulary. You're recognizing, you're seeing who they are, you're seeing their good qualities, you're talking to them, you're speaking to them about that. And then what does that do? That strengthens that relationship, but it also strengthens their inner confidence in who they are as a person. That my teacher sees this quality. My teacher sees that I am generous. My teacher sees that I may have been struggling with my temper, and I've become more meek in how I am. That my teacher sees that I'm very docile. That you have this beautiful language that you can surround the child with. So to continue here, again, is soothe. So in the development, the child relies on the adult to help regulate these emotions and these behaviors. So this is where the co-regulation is important. So it doesn't, we all know, we learn this in our education classes, that we don't need to just scream louder in the classroom, right? Sometimes if we just get calm, Okay, that kind of sets the tone for the classroom. All right. So this repeated experience of this co-regulation, that we're going to help them to begin to self-regulate. Okay, and then it begins to build that resilience that they may need, and also is resilience, which is also how we would understand fortitude, this ability to move through situations. And then finally, what this ultimately does is that the child feels secure in the relationship with the adult, that there's not this struggle or this disagreement that's kind of they're experiencing, but this secure attachment is very healthy, where the child trusts the teacher, they feel calm in which they communicate. And so it's building the secure attachment that, again, is allows the cordial access in order to improve learning and the behavioral outcomes. So hopefully you've been able to see, again, that this bringing together, that understanding that we see these what we need for this, for their brains to be fully functioning. Okay, to get to that we have this where we need to regulate, we relate, we can come to this point of reason. That excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay, that there are all these different strategies, okay, that come from this time, this decade of the brain, that we can bring into the classroom, but it needs to be kind of held up. What needs to be foundational to all of these different strategies is the virtues, is the language of virtue, because as I said at the beginning, the virtues reside in the soul. Okay, we're body soul people. Our soul has an intellect and a will. Okay, the emotions and the feelings that they're experiencing, those are taking place in the body. So the virtues are which enable us to help regulate that. And again, this regulation, this relate, this comes to the point where we're able to be open for reason and for learning. So to bring this to conclusion, I kind of want to end where you are as the teachers, and to emphasize what I was saying at the beginning, that the importance that you have with your identity, who you are. Do you see yourselves understanding that as a believing, Catholic Christian, do you see yourself as the one that's there? It's instrumental in bringing these children and raising them in grace, really, that this is the worldview that you bring and the culture that surrounds it. That hopefully, you have the same rock foundation in your own life, that you have this, understand the surround of faith, hope, and love, understanding what it means to have the virtues that establish the character, because the children, they're looking at you all the time. They're going to see these virtues first modeled in you and their teacher. They're going to learn from you, and that you take this example of the man in Luke, where he said that he dug deep, that you build that foundation within your own heart. And that really comes with the life of virtue. It comes with grace. It comes with the sacramental life. All that we do, that we hand on to the children, that brings us really to this one question that I think all of us should ask ourselves in Catholic education, and each day when we enter the building, that do the students that are with you every day, can they recognize that you've been with Jesus? Can they go home to whatever they may be going home to? Can they get in the car? Can they get in the bus? Can they go wherever? And can they say that my coach, the person that I meet at the front desk, the teacher that I see first thing in the morning, that they're somebody that they have been with Jesus? And this is what the virtues, and understanding what the virtues mean, enables you, because it empowers you, it strengthens your character of who you are. It gives you this beautiful language that not only is it the way in which you conduct yourself in the day, but it gives you a language that enables the children to see that this teacher, this person who I encounter, sees me, that I feel safe with them, that I feel soothed with them, that I'm secure in their presence. And the way in which we can kind of find ourselves is this great quote. There's this old Carthusian motto that they had, is that the cross of Christ is still while the world turns. This is what I mean by the still point of grace, that ultimately what we can't lose sight of, and this is what can happen in social emotional learning, that we lose sight of, is the cross. We lose sight of sacrifice. We lose sight of the redemption. We lose sight of that is the person of Jesus Christ, that he's the one that sustains us. Because that's what the little flower did when she made those little sacrifice beads. She recognized that I had to do a little bit of penance to grow in this virtue of patience, that I had to sacrifice, that I had to die to self, die to my will to do the right thing. It isn't just learning a bunch of skills and strategies. It isn't kind of some sort of cute little clever activity that we do. No, it's taking, understanding the cross, understanding that Jesus Christ, who died for us, who rose for us, why? So that we can be united, we can live with God forever in the household of heaven. That's why we live virtuously. That's why we do that we do, is because becoming the person God's created us to be, living in the dignity of being a person created in God's image and likeness, is there. And the answer for all of this lies where we ourselves can co-regulate with Jesus. Co-regulation, as I said, is a biological fact. There's neuroception that takes place. There's resonance. So that resonance, which we mean by that if we had two harps in a room and I plucked the third string on one, it would resonate on the third one on the other one. That vibration would take place. We talk about the mirror neurons, is what we know, is that if I smile at you, you smile back. So if this happens with us when we interact with each other, Jesus Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity, that we can come to him and he's going to calm us. He's going to be the one that through his grace, he's going to give growth to the virtues in our life. He's going to help us to overcome those emotions and those feelings and the difficulties that we all encounter every day, that we're not doing this alone. Because he said to us, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest." He is there. He is present with us, and he desires to be God and to be God in our own lives. So hopefully, if I talk to this, you have an understanding why we just can't leave aside the virtues. The virtues need to be integral to all that we do in Catholic education, all that we do in the development of the social emotional development of the children, because it's a part of our beautiful faith, and it's also a part of God's grace. And God gives us the grace. Why? Because he wants to participate with us. He wants to be with us when we're doing this. We're not alone. He's with us. So thank you for listening, for participating. I don't know if there's any questions or comments, but that's all I have to offer as this explanation.
Thank you, sister, so much for being a part of this. I don't see any questions or notes in the chat, so we'll just give a minute maybe to see if anybody's, burning with questions, that they can throw them in there. If not, I really appreciate joining us today. Thank you so much for. Okay. I think we are all set. No questions seem to be popping up. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.